My name is Rachel Whitaker. I'm 34 years old, and last Thursday I got fired from the company I helped build by the very man I once mentored. His name is Jason Kellerman, and he stood across from me in the conference room in my seat holding the Mont Blanc pen I gave him for his one-year work anniversary. He smiled as he read from a document I wasn't allowed to see in advance. Due to an ongoing restructuring effort and recent performance concerns, we're ending your contract effective immediately. Just like that, 14 years of work vanished into HR speak. But this isn't the story of a woman defeated. This is the story of how I used every ounce of what they taught me against them and built something that couldn't be stolen. Let me take you back to where it all really began. I joined Stratus Partners fresh out of grad school, wide-eyed driven, and dangerously optimistic. My mother called it blind faith. I called it hunger. I started as a junior strategist, working 60-hour weeks, sleeping with my phone under my pillow, eating dry cereal from desk drawers. It didn't take long for people to notice. Within 5 years, I had helped bring in a $12 million client account and was promoted to Director of Strategic Client Relations. That title might not mean much to outsiders, but inside the four glass walls of Stratus, it meant influence. I shaped messaging campaigns for Fortune 500s. I was in the room where mergers happened. And more importantly, I was mentoring the new blood. People like Jason. Jason Kellerman was assigned to me as an intern 3 years ago. On paper, Columbia grad major in behavioral economics, minor in charm. In reality, he was smart, yes, but green. He didn't know how to write a deck that didn't look like a BuzzFeed article. He once referred to our biggest client's CEO as the lady with the scarf in a proposal draft. I coached him. I edited his work, cleaned up his blunders, taught him how to read a boardroom. I invited him to client lunches he had no business attending. He was grateful, or so I thought. At the time, I took pride in it. Women in my position didn't always pull others up, but I believed in creating a culture of mentorship. Jason would thank me constantly, even brought me coffee every Thursday without fail. He once said I was like his corporate big sister, the kind of praise that makes you let your guard down. But there were signs, the late-night text asking for feedback that slowly shifted to probing questions about our internal politics. The way he always knew what to say in meetings, even when he wasn't supposed to be in them. Still, I thought maybe he's just ambitious. After all, isn't that what I was too once? Then came the promotion cycle. The company was adding a new executive vice president role to head up client strategy, a position I was born for. I had the tenure, the record, the support. Or so I thought. I worked late nights drafting my vision memo. I even used that Mont Blanc pen to sign the internal pitch. 2 days later, Jason was announced as the EVP. They called him a disruptive innovator. The email was signed off by Marcus Kellerman, VP of Global Development, and Jason's father. I stared at the screen for a full minute. I didn't even know they were related. That information had never been disclosed. Suddenly, so many things snapped into place, the out-of-nowhere praise Jason had received, the projects he'd been assigned, without process, the senior meetings he accidentally sat in on. It wasn't mentorship. It was manipulation. I'd trained my replacement. I confronted HR. I was calm, methodical. I asked for clarification on the EVP selection process. They told me the decision had been made based on alignment with long-term company goals. I asked if the familial connection had been considered a conflict of interest. They assured me it had been disclosed at an appropriate time, whatever that meant. I left that meeting with a pit in my stomach and fire in my chest. Over the next few weeks, my access began to shrink. Projects I led were reassigned. Clients were transferred for streamlining. The Thursday coffee stopped coming. Jason stopped making eye contact. One afternoon, I walked past a meeting room and saw him leading a strategy session using a framework I had designed. My name wasn't mentioned. That night, I met with my oldest friend, Sophia Lee, a corporate attorney who knew Stratus well. We sat in a dim bar, rain smearing the windows. She listened, nodded, and then said something I'll never forget. "You're not paranoid. You're being erased." I spent the next 2 months collecting every email timestamp proposal version, every shred of proof that what I built was mine. I didn't want to sue. I wanted to outmaneuver. I started meeting quietly with a few of our oldest clients. Not to poach them, not yet. Just to ask questions, to listen, to remind them who I was. Turns out loyalty still exists in corporate America if you know where to find it. Then came last Thursday. I was called into a review meeting with HR. I walked in wearing my best blazer and red lipstick armor, not fashion. Jason sat across the table. He read from a script. I was dismissed. Effective immediately. My keycard would stop working by noon. When I asked for a copy of the termination file, they said it would be sent by courier. It never was. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I thanked them, took my things, walked past the intern I once mentored, now avoiding my gaze. And I left. Not just the building, the chapter. At home, I opened a clean notebook. I wrote one sentence: "You cannot steal what I'm about to build." I made 3 calls that night. One to Sophia, one to Julia Tron, a junior strategist who had confided in me weeks earlier about her discomfort with how things were changing, and one to Max Harper, a longtime client who'd been strangely quiet lately. All 3 answered. All 3 said the same thing. What do you need? This story doesn't end with me getting justice. Not yet. But it starts here, with a woman who gave everything to a system that was never built for her, who got burned, who learned, and who's now planning something that can't be undone. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I poured coffee into the ceramic mug I kept from my office, the one that says, "Data is my love language." And I sat at my dining table with 3 things: a pen, a plan, and a promise. Because if they thought that was the end of my story, they clearly forgot who taught Jason everything he knows. Next, I had to find out what Jason was hiding, and I knew exactly where to start. I started with the calendar logs. Every company laptop at Stratus is synced to a private archive of calendar events, something most people forget. When Jason had been working under me, we shared access for project planning. Before they shut me out, I exported a local archive of his event history, just in case. What I found wasn't illegal, but it sure as hell was suspicious. There were multiple back-to-back lunch meetings off-site with someone named CC, an alias maybe, or internal shorthand. These meetings were never in the team calendar. I checked one in particular that stood out: 1 and 4, a Tuesday marked vendor consult. Only that Tuesday I remembered we had our quarterly client summit, which Jason had conveniently missed due to stomach flu. I cross-checked the location in my own synced map data. It was the Roosevelt Hotel Lounge. So I went there. It's funny how a building can have a smell. The Roosevelt always reeked of overpriced cigars and old wood polish. I sat in the same corner booth Jason once favored and waited. I wasn't sure for what. Maybe clarity, maybe just a trace. But that place, it gave off backroom deal energy. I asked the bartender casually if he remembered someone fitting Jason's description. I even showed a photo. He narrowed his eyes. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "Came in with some suit. Called him Charlie something. Big guy. Accent, like from Texas or Georgia bingo." That night, Sophia and I did a deep dive on internal documents. I still had access to client contract drafts, M+ and A rumors, executive reshuffles. It took 5 hours and 2 large pizzas, but we finally landed on something. A holding company called Celtic Crown Ventures had submitted an exploratory offer to Stratus's board 6 months ago. The name of the Texas-accented partner, Charles "Charlie" Kellerman, Jason's uncle. Jason wasn't just replacing me, he was positioning the firm for a quiet acquisition from within. I sat in silence for a long time. I felt a wave of guilt, not because I lost the job, but because I realized how blind I'd been. All the signs were there. Jason's sudden rise, projects vanishing from my plate conversations I was excluded from. I hadn't been paranoid. I'd been too trusting. Too proud. Too corporate, maybe. But now I had something better than bitterness. I had motive. And I had Julia. The next day, I asked Julia to meet me at a coffee shop near Lincoln Park. She looked nervous, like she thought she was being watched. "I don't know how much longer I can stay at Stratus," she said quietly. "It's all changing. Jason has this way of making everyone feel replaceable." I didn't push. I just asked her for one thing: access to the internal pitch deck Jason had presented to the board 2 months ago. She hesitated. It's encrypted, internal only. I slid over an old USB. I don't need the whole deck, just the opening summary. I just need to see what he claimed was his vision. That evening, she sent it. Jason's deck was full of buzzwords: scalable culture, efficiency maximization, client lifecycle compression. But what caught my attention wasn't the language. It was a diagram, a circle model I had created 3 years ago during a retreat in Vermont. The exact same graphic, down to the color scheme. Only now the watermark read, J. Kellerman, Strategic Vision 2025. He hadn't just stolen my job, he had stolen my mind. I wanted to storm the building. Instead, I called Max Harper. Max had been distant since Jason's rise, but I had a feeling there was more to it. When he answered, his voice was clipped. Rachel, I figured you might call. Max, tell me the truth. Are you still under contract with Stratus? A pause. Then no. I pulled out last week, quietly. Why? Because Jason and that southern uncle of his tried to fold me into a vertical that smelled like insider trading. They offered me equity I didn't ask for. Told me you were unstable. I closed my eyes. Would you be willing to say that, on record? A long breath. Only if this goes somewhere real. Oh, it will, I promised. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need revenge. I needed revelation. The truth wasn't just powerful, it was marketable. But I had to be careful. Because if Jason's willing to lie to a board steal from a mentor and gaslight a team, he might be capable of worse. That night, I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. My own eyes stared back, clear but heavy. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. And tomorrow, I'd start building the one thing they never saw coming: a network. One built on truth, loyalty, and everything they'd thrown away. Because I knew now Jason hadn't just erased me. He'd exposed himself. And I was ready to bring the receipts. When you've been part of a machine for long enough, you start thinking like it: processes, approvals, hierarchies, chain of command. What they don't teach you is how to move once you're outside of it. Free fall is silent, and it's damn lonely unless you learn how to stretch your wings fast. I had no office, no staff, no funding, just a tarnished name, a flash drive full of receipts, and 3 people who believed in me. But what I did have, what Jason would never understand, was something corporate sharks overlook. Relationships. Real ones. Built not out of convenience or leverage, but time, honesty, and showing the hell up when nobody else does. The first person I called was Theo Caldwell. Theo used to be Stratus's chief of market intelligence. Brilliant guy, looked like a cross between Idris Elba and a weathered detective novel cover. He left 2 years ago after a philosophical disagreement with the board. Translation, he found out they were cooking spin reports and didn't want to sell out. We kept in touch over the years, mostly LinkedIn likes and the occasional whiskey-fueled catch-up. But when I told him what I'd uncovered about the Kellermans and Celtic Crown Ventures, he didn't even let me finish the sentence. I knew that name was dirty, he growled over the phone. I flagged their shell orgs in 222. Marcus buried it in committee minutes. I didn't even ask if he was in. He was already booking a flight from Austin before I hung up. Next was Beverly Ruiz. She'd been Marcus's executive assistant for almost a decade, but everyone knew she was more than that. Beverly was the kind of woman who could remember 12 lunch orders, manage 5 executive calendars, and still find time to text her niece about her ballet recital. People talked around her, not realizing she was listening and remembering. She'd always been kind to me, even when Marcus wasn't. I sent her a note, just one sentence. I know about Celtic Crown, I think it's time we talked. She replied with a meeting invite for the next day. Private cafe, cash only. She showed up in sunglasses and ordered peppermint tea, like we were just catching up about yoga. You've got 5 minutes, she said. After that, if you mention Jason's name too loud, I walk. So I talked. Fast. I told her what I'd found, what Jason had done, what Max told me, what Julia had sent me. Her expression didn't change, but her tea sat untouched. I always knew Marcus had plans for his son, she said finally. But I didn't know how far they'd go, or how many people would disappear along the way. She pulled a flash drive from her purse, slipped it under her napkin, and pushed it toward me. This is from the internal audio backups. Weekly board call 2 weeks before your firing. Listen close. I didn't ask what was on it. I thanked her and left. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by Thai takeout boxes and open laptops. I plugged the flash drive into my personal machine, expecting noise. What I got was poison. Marcus's voice, cool and confident. "We remove Rachel before Q3. Jason will finalize the verticals with Crown. Any PR backlash, we spin it as a cultural modernization. She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet." They knew. They planned it. My career wasn't collateral, it was scheduled attrition. I could have cried, but the fury was bigger than the sadness now. They thought I was just another replaceable cog. They thought silence would buy them safety. They underestimated how loud I can get when I'm angry, and how many people remember who helped them when no one else did. The next morning, I called Sophia. "I want to form a company," I said. "What kind of company? One that tells the truth. One that builds things ethically, strategically, and transparently. We help clients grow, but we don't lie for them. We don't gaslight their employees. We don't burn our best people to make room for legacy babies." She paused. "You want to take on Stratus?" "No," I said. "I want to make them irrelevant." By noon, she had filed the LLC paperwork. Name Signal North Strategies. I chose the name carefully. Signal, because that's what truth is, a guiding light through noise. North, because I needed a new compass. One not bought and sold in backroom deals. I made a list. It wasn't long. 5 people I could trust. Not just work well with trust. Julia, Theo. Beverly, unofficially Sophia, and Max. That's all I had. We met in the back room of a co-working space near Union Square. It was cramped, the AC didn't work, and we had to plug in a space heater to keep the coffee machine running. But it was real, ours. I passed out printed packets old school. Jason never liked printouts. "Here's the plan," I said. "We're building a competitor not just to Stratus, but to the entire game they're playing. We offer strategy consulting with transparency baked in. No offshore shell orgs, no nepotistic promotions, no rebranded theft. We lead with values, and we tell the whole damn truth." Theo raised an eyebrow. "You realize you just declared war, right?" "I'm not scared," I said. "I was scared when I had to pretend Jason earned it." Everyone went quiet. Then Sophia tapped her pen against the desk. "Let's burn the house of cards." We got to work. We used Julia's insights to map which clients were most vulnerable to Jason's manipulation. We reached out to 2 of them under the radar, under the guise of a market research initiative. We didn't pitch, we just listened. They talked. Oh, they talked. Turns out, Jason's brilliant ideas weren't landing well. One client, a luxury retail brand, said Jason tried to streamline their customer story by gutting all their legacy branding, losing nearly $500K in Q1. Another, a fintech startup, said their conversion rates dropped 38% since Jason's team modernized the outreach. We didn't gloat. We didn't slam Stratus. We just said, we think we can help. No gimmicks, no exec pet projects. Just clean data-informed strategy. They agreed to test pilots. 2 30-day contracts. Modest scope, modest pay. But it was the start of something. Signal North was breathing. We rented a tiny studio space in Brooklyn. Exposed brick, 1 conference table, a neon sign from Etsy that said, "Lead loudly." It wasn't glamorous. It was honest. And every day I walked in and saw that sign flicker. I remembered what Jason said during my termination. "You were too emotionally involved in your work." Damn right I was. You don't give clients your best unless you feel invested. You don't grow talent unless you care. Emotion isn't a weakness. It's the only reason people stay loyal in a world built to discard them. 3 weeks in, we got an email from a burner account. No signature, no subject line, just a Dropbox link. I almost didn't click it. Inside, a full PDF dump of Jason's revised internal compensation model for Stratus. It showed bonuses being redirected to new hires with 0 tenure. Consultants with track records were being ghosted from payouts. One comment read, "Legacy staff not aligned with modernization should be cycled." Beverly, it had to be her. The document was damning. Not illegal, but definitely unethical. The kind of thing that would tank recruiting if it got out. We didn't leak it, not yet, but we compiled it into a report packaged with case studies from the clients we'd recovered. We called it Growth with Integrity, a new playbook. We didn't send it to the press. We sent it to every CMO and CEO on Stratus's public client list, one by one, with no threats, just facts. The response: 10 inquiries in 2 days, 3 meeting requests, one from a major tech firm that had been with Stratus for 9 years. But with momentum comes danger. Julia called me at 11:34 p.m. on a Friday. "Rachel, someone's been asking questions about you internally. Not just casual, like digging. I think you're being monitored." I sat up in bed, heart thudding. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but you need to move carefully." "They're scared. That means they're gonna start swinging." That weekend, I pulled down every trace of my digital trail. I wiped old devices, changed every password. Sophia drafted cease and desist letters in case they tried to smear me legally. I wasn't naive. I knew Stratus could burn me to the ground with the right leverage. But they didn't have one thing. They didn't have the truth. And truth used strategically is the sharpest blade there is. I stared at the Mont Blanc pen sitting on my shelf. The one Jason used to fire me. I kept it not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of how people weaponize gifts, of how easily trust becomes leverage. I uncapped it and wrote one sentence across a blank whiteboard in the office. "They built on favors, we build on facts." Everyone signed it. The war had begun, and we weren't going in swinging wildly. We were building the pressure slowly, carefully. Because when the collapse comes, it's not the loudest noise that wins, it's the one with the deepest echo. And I was about to shake the foundations of everything Jason thought he'd secured. Success doesn't scream, it whispers. For the first time in months, I was waking up not with panic, but with purpose. Signal North was real. We had 4 clients in rotation, a pipeline of inbound interest, and our first proper whiteboard covered in deadlines instead of dreams. The office still smelled like fresh paint and stress-induced takeout, but it was ours. And every step forward felt like a small act of rebellion. That Monday, Julia walked in carrying a box of pastries and a manila envelope. "The pastries are from our new client," she said with a grin. "And the envelope? Well, you might want to sit down." It was from a law firm. The logo embossed in silver stiff paper that felt like it had never been touched by human hands. Marcus Kellerman's firm. It was a cease and desist, no surprise there. But what made me pause was the second document, a civil suit filed in New York Superior Court. Plaintiff Stratus Partners. Defendant Rachel Whitaker. Grounds misappropriation of trade secrets, breach of non-compete tortious interference with client contracts. I read the words twice. My stomach flipped. They were coming for me, hard. Sophia showed up 20 minutes later, already pulling her hair back and cracking her knuckles like a boxer. "This is weak," she said after scanning the papers. "They're throwing sand in your eyes to slow you down. It's not about winning the case, it's about bleeding you dry in court." I knew she was right. This wasn't justice. It was attrition by bureaucracy. Stratus had the money, the lawyers, the patience. What they didn't have yet was public narrative. But they were working on that too. By Friday, I got a Google alert on my name. A blog post on a mid-tier business site ran a story titled "Rogue Exec Rachel Whitaker From Boardroom to Backroom Schemes." The article cited anonymous sources from Stratus claiming I stole proprietary frameworks, poached clients, and orchestrated a smear campaign out of spite. It ended with a smug line: "Whitaker's fall from grace is a cautionary tale of ego over ethics." I almost laughed. Ego! They wanted to lecture me on ego. But underneath the anger, I felt something colder: fear. I wasn't afraid of being wrong. I was afraid people would believe I was. That all the careful work we'd done, the integrity we'd led with, could be undone with one viral narrative. We regrouped that night. Theo slammed his laptop shut. "This isn't just PR, it's psyops. They're trying to turn your team against you, make it too risky for anyone to stand with you." And that's when it happened. Julia asked to speak to me privately. She looked pale, shaky. She took me out to the stairwell behind our office, same one where we used to vent about Jason back at Stratus. "I need to tell you something," she whispered. "I got a call from someone on their side." My heart dropped. "Who?" "I think it was Marcus. He didn't say directly, but he offered me a job. Triple salary, remote, said I could walk away clean if I sever ties quietly." I looked at her, really looked. This wasn't some melodramatic scene. This was real temptation, real risk. She was 28, student loans, rent in a city that eats the weak. And here I was asking her to fight Goliath with a stick and a promise. "What did you say?" I asked. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I told him I'd think about it, but I'm telling you now because I already made up my mind. I'm staying. I believe in what we're doing. But I needed you to know. It should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like a ticking clock had just started counting down. I hugged her, tight, and I told her something I hadn't said aloud to anyone. If this all blows up, don't stay for me. Stay because you want to be the kind of person who didn't blink. But if you ever need to leave, I won't blame you. The next week was a fog of legal meetings and media management. Sophia crafted a statement we could share with clients, calmly refuting the allegations. We didn't mention Stratus by name. We just laid out our values, our commitments, and why Signal North existed. But silence has weight. We started feeling it in emails that didn't get replies, in prospects who asked for more time to consider, in vendors suddenly raising rates. Reputation is currency, and ours was being chipped at slowly, methodically, surgically. Theo brought in a contact, a PR fixer named Erin Mendez. She looked like someone who'd been in the spin game since Blackberries were still cool. You need a counter-narrative, she said bluntly, one that hits their hypocrisy without looking like vengeance. We brainstormed, drafted, rewrote. Eventually, we landed on a campaign called Built Without Bloodlines. It was subtle. Just a series of video case studies highlighting our clients, our team, and how merit, not legacy, built everything we'd done. No shade, no names, just truth plainly told. We launched it with a single video, Julia talking about what it felt like to be mentored by someone who didn't treat her as a threat but a partner. The closing shot, her wiping clean a whiteboard that read, "Cycle out the old." Then she wrote, "Build with purpose." The video went modestly viral in industry circles. Quiet applause. But it gave us air again. Breathing room. Proof that truth still mattered. And then just as I started to feel the weight lift another blow, Beverly sent me a one-line message at midnight. "I can't keep helping you. They know." That was it. No explanation, no signature. I tried calling. No answer. Tried her office line the next morning. "She's on medical leave," said a voice I didn't recognize. Gone. Beverly had risked everything to pass me that boardroom audio. And now she was out. Silenced or worse. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours. Not moving, not breathing. Then I packed my bag, went to the office, and erased every sensitive file we had that could trace back to her. We'd cover her trail. That was the least I could do. That night, I stood in the middle of our small office, lights off, just the neon flicker of lead loudly humming above my head. The room felt different now. Not empty, just heavier. They weren't playing games, not anymore. But they'd made a mistake. They'd taken someone out who had nothing to gain by helping me. Beverly didn't owe me anything. She wasn't looking for a new job. She just knew what was right. And that made her dangerous to them. That's when I realized this wasn't about winning the fight anymore. It was about making sure the right story survived it. We were in the middle of a war for narrative. And I was done playing nice. I looked at that damn Mont Blanc pen one more time. Jason's smug face flashed in my memory, that fake casual smirk he wore like armor. He thought he'd buried me. He didn't know I was planting roots. The next step wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical, precise, strategic. Because if Stratus wanted a fight, I'd give them one they couldn't spin their way out of. And I knew exactly where to strike next. You reach a point where you stop asking yourself, "Am I doing the right thing?" and start asking, "Who else is willing to?" That was where I was. Past fear, past anger. The Stratus lawsuit was still hanging over my head like a guillotine. Julia was burning out trying to keep our ops going. Theo was growing tense, constantly looking over his shoulder. Even Sophia was starting to look more like a field medic than a lawyer. And Beverly, God, Beverly, gone without a trace. Every time I passed that dark blue mug she left on my desk after our last meeting, I felt a knot in my chest. She had crossed a line she knew couldn't be uncrossed. And now it was up to me to make sure it hadn't been for nothing. So I made a decision. If they were playing in the shadows, we would shine the biggest damn spotlight we could find. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. A guy named Marcus DeWitt, an investigative reporter I'd met back when Stratus was trying to spin a scandal involving a mismanaged tech IPO. Back then, he'd sniffed out more than our PR team could bury. I respected him, even as we tried to outrun him. I messaged him at midnight. "I think I have a story for you. About a firm you already know. Stratus." I have recordings, documents, patterns of internal suppression, and someone on the inside who got disappeared. He replied in 6 minutes. Send me nothing. Meet me in person. You pick the place. We met at a nondescript coffee shop in Queens, the kind of place with dusty booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since Obama's first term. I brought a burner laptop. I walked him through everything: Jason's nepotistic rise, the Celtic Crown shell deal, the falsified credit for my framework, the board meeting audio Beverly gave me, and the client reports we'd documented since forming Signal North. I didn't name names, not yet, but I showed enough to prove I wasn't bluffing. He didn't interrupt, just kept nodding, jotting notes, one eyebrow slightly raised. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "This is the kind of story that ends careers." "I'm counting on it," I said. "But you know this puts a target on your back. And the people close to you. I already have one, so do they. The difference is, now we point back." He agreed to pursue it on record. But with one condition: we needed one more insider to verify it. Someone current, someone credible. I knew what that meant. I had to dig back into enemy territory. It was Theo, surprisingly, who gave me the in. "You remember Elizabeth Carter?" he asked one afternoon. "Used to be VP of Organizational Culture." I did. Elizabeth was old school, polished, spoke in HR metaphors, but saw through BS better than most. She'd left Stratus quietly last year, citing personal health reasons, which in corporate terms usually meant I knew too much and wouldn't play dumb. Theo had kept in touch. She was consulting now, semi-retired, burnt out. But she still had the full exit documentation, and more importantly, the same kind of simmering regret that builds up when you watch good people get tossed overboard to keep the yacht steady. I called her, told her why. She didn't say yes right away. She asked for 2 days to think. When she finally agreed, it was with one condition. "I won't go public until your evidence is airtight," she said. "If I'm going down, it's not for drama, it's for a reckoning." I respected that, so we began to build the timeline. Piece by piece. Beverly's file transfers, Jason's proposal deck metadata, audio timestamps, HR restructuring notices. We lined it all up until even the most skeptical mind could see it was orchestrated, meant to displace and discredit all in service of a quiet internal acquisition. Marcus called the article "The Inheritance Deal." It ran 5 200 words long and dropped on a Tuesday morning. By 9:17 a.m., it had been shared 200 times. By 10:45, Stratus released a non-response. By noon, CNBC called. And at 3:02 p.m., Jason himself posted a smug LinkedIn statement about innovation requiring bold changes and navigating resistance from those stuck in the past. I stared at it for a long time. It was his way of taunting me, of pretending he hadn't just been publicly humiliated. But the real damage wasn't his ego. It was what came next. That evening, our office got a visit. I was alone. Everyone had gone home early celebration dinner. I stayed behind to catch up on notes. That's when the elevator chimed and the door opened. Jason, wearing his signature navy wool coat and that same old cologne I used to mistake for charm. I didn't say anything, just stood by the desk and waited. He walked in slowly, like he was trying to measure the room. "You always did like working late," he said. "You always did like stealing what other people built." He smirked. "You know I could have helped you. If you just played along. You were always so emotional. That was your weakness." "No," I said. "That was my weapon. You never figured that out." His smile faded. "You know this ends badly, right? You can't win against people like my father. They've built empires from worse than you." "I'm not trying to win, Jason. I'm trying to reveal. Winning is just a side effect." He stepped closer, and for a second, I saw the boy he used to pretend to be, the eager mentee, the one who brought coffee, and asked how I managed to keep clients so loyal. "You don't understand the system," he said softly. "People don't care about truth. They care about convenience. They'll forget you." "Maybe," I said, "but they'll remember you, and not for the reasons you want." He didn't respond, just turned and walked out. The door shut behind him like a punctuation mark. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I was finally feeling something deeper, a clarity I hadn't had since day one. This was bigger than revenge. Bigger than Jason. This was about rewriting the rules for every person who'd ever been told to sit down, smile, and let someone else take credit. I stood in front of the mirror in the office bathroom, exhausted but unbroken. My reflection was older than when I started this. worn down, but steadier. I took a Sharpie from the drawer and wrote one word on the edge of the mirror. Undeniable. Not loud, not flashy, but permanent. What I didn't know, what none of us could have known, was that 2 days later, something would break that would change everything. A new email from an anonymous address. Subject line, "You missed something." Inside a single audio file. It wasn't from Beverly, wasn't from Elizabeth. It was from inside Celtic Crown Ventures. And the voice on it? Marcus Kellerman, laughing, saying, "If we get this right, Jason walks out owning half of what she bled for. We don't just win, we erase her, like she never existed." The timestamp, 2 months before I was fired. The file ended with 3 words, "She'll never know." I sat frozen, not because I was surprised, but because I realized we weren't done. We were just getting started. The audio file looped in my head like a war drum. "We don't just win, we erase her." Marcus Kellerman's voice, smug and casual, planning to wipe out everything I'd built, like I was just a line item in a quarterly report. It wasn't about the company anymore. It was never just about Jason. It was about what they believed they were entitled to because of their last names, their connections, their money. They saw people like me as stepping stones, temporary scaffolding for their permanent place at the top. But not anymore. This tape. It wasn't just a smoking gun, it was the blueprint of intent. Malicious, premeditated, and arrogant as hell. I brought it straight to Sophia. She listened in silence, then sat back and let out a low whistle. "This could pierce the corporate veil," she whispered. "If we can connect this to Jason's promotion, the board decisions, the compensation shifts, hell, this is RICO-level manipulation." We both knew what that meant, racketeering, corruption, and the potential to blow Stratus wide open. But we had to be smart, careful, precise, so we drafted our final move like a campaign. Theo compiled the client testimony into sworn affidavits. Elizabeth, bless her brave heart, signed an official declaration and agreed to a video interview. Julia gave a full timeline of internal manipulation from her time at Stratus. Max, the fintech client, wrote a public op-ed about what integrity in consulting should look like without naming Stratus, but ripping into everything they stood for. And me, I reached out to every former colleague who had left Stratus in the past 2 years. Most ignored me. 3 responded. 2 said thank you. 1 offered something better. Her name was Carmen Alvarez, former VP of Diversity and Ethics. I hadn't spoken to her since an awkward conference lunch in 2019, but she remembered me. And she'd saved something. An internal memo never released publicly outlining a strategic reputation cleanup initiative that included phrases like removing legacy personnel who don't align with modernization and preemptively reassigning credit from high-risk former executives to current leadership. My name was highlighted in red. She gave it to us without hesitation. "I stayed quiet for too long," she said. "They weaponized silence." I won't. It was all coming together. The pieces, the voices, the truth. We coordinated with Marcus DeWitt, the journalist. His team at an independent media network was ready to drop a full investigation, video documents, audio, sworn statements, all in one coordinated release. Launch date Monday 8:00 a.m. We called it the Ghost Ledger, a reference to the way they tried to make people like me disappear off the record, off the books, off the map. The night before launch, I stood in our office alone. The neon sign buzzed softly. "Lead loudly." I traced the edge of Beverly's mug still on the shelf untouched. I thought about her, about my mother, who'd once told me, "Don't be afraid to be too much in a room full of people who are too little." I opened a notepad and wrote a letter, not to the board, not to Jason, but to myself. "Dear Rachel, you did everything they said you couldn't. You were kind and they called it weakness. You were smart and they stole your voice. You came back and they tried to erase you again. But tomorrow you stop whispering. Tomorrow they remember your name, for real this time. Monday 8:00 a.m. The Ghost Ledger went live. By 8:22 a.m., the story hit the 3 trending spot on Twitter. By 9:10, the Stratus website crashed under traffic. By 9:37, CNBC ran the headline, "Exclusive Stratus Faces Whistleblower Firestorm Over Nepotism and Manipulated Acquisitions." By 11 Neo, Jason Kellerman deleted his LinkedIn post. At noon, I got the call, from a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Jason. His voice was different this time. No smirk, no swagger, just silence for 3 long seconds. "You really did it," he said finally. You brought the house down. I didn't say anything. I never hated you, he continued. I didn't think you mattered that much. That was all I needed to hear. I hung up. That afternoon, Stratus's board released a statement saying they were initiating an internal audit and executive restructuring. By the end of the week, Marcus Kellerman had stepped aside. By Friday, Jason went dark. No posts, no public response, just silence. But for me, that was the start. We received over 200 emails in 48 hours. Executives, assistants, analysts, even interns sharing their stories, their erasures, their betrayals, people thanking us, people crying on Zoom calls, saying things like, "You reminded me I'm not crazy, and I almost gave up." Signal North tripled in client requests within a week. We had to freeze intake. We weren't ready for that much light, but damn, we welcomed it. Julia smiled for the first time in weeks. Theo poured bourbon into his coffee and called it legacy erasure juice. Even Sophia, who never relaxes, gave me a hug and whispered, "You did it, girl. You flipped the whole damn table." But it wasn't just a win. It was a warning. Because systems don't fall in a day. They morph, they camouflage, and they try to come back wearing a new face and a better pitch deck. The fight wasn't over, but we had leveled the field. We had rewritten the rules. We had told the story before someone else twisted it for us. That night, as the city lights flickered outside the window, I poured a glass of wine, sat with the Mont Blanc pen still in my drawer, and finally let myself smile. I didn't need revenge. I needed remembrance. Not of what they took from me, but of what they couldn't. Epilogue. 3 months later, Beverly called me. Her voice was steady. "I'm back," she said. "And I'm not scared anymore." She didn't have to explain. I knew what it meant. We'd won something deeper than a story or a contract. We'd cracked something open. And now it was up to us to make sure it stayed open for every woman, every first-gen graduate, every quiet genius passed over for being too soft or too brown or too honest. We weren't just building a firm anymore. We were building a future, one name at a time, one truth at a time. And I'll be damned if anyone tries to erase me again. Not now, not ever.
Story 2. I'm Nathan Carter, 34, and if you had told me last year that I'd walk away from my entire family without looking back, I would have laughed it off. But betrayal doesn't always arrive with loud fights or dramatic ultimatums. It creeps up quietly hidden under the weight of unspoken expectations until one day it crushes you. For years, I was the steady one, the dependable eldest, the quiet fixer who always stepped in when things fell apart. I had a decent career as a software consultant, not flashy, but comfortable. My car, a 6-year-old Subaru. My apartment clean, modest. My weekends usually consumed handling someone else's problems. My mother, Vivian, 63, worked part-time at a craft store and loved telling everyone she was semi-retired. My father, Ron, 65, still fancied himself a handyman, though every home project somehow ended up costing triple and needing a bailout. My younger brother, Ryan, 30, was in that perpetual finding himself phase 1 year, a photographer the next, an amateur brewer. And then there was my sister, Jenna, 27, a free spirit in the worst possible sense, always posting yoga poses and mindfulness quotes, while her Venmo balance languished near zero. It didn't happen all at once, this slide into becoming their financial safety net. A couple $100s for Ryan's rent when a client ghosted him. A few hundred more when Jenna's vintage VW broke down for the umpteenth time. My parents' property taxes. When did they stop budgeting for those? I rarely protested. It felt easier to help than to deal with the guilt-laced lectures. "We're family, Nathan," my mother would sigh. "Families support each other." And I did. Quietly, predictably. The one thing I kept sacred, the annual Vermont cabin trip, was different. A slice of wilderness that belonged to my late grandfather where we could unplug and reconnect. When he passed, he left it jointly to my dad and my Uncle Caleb, a gruff but dependable figure who always treated me like an adult. Every October, like clockwork, I coordinated this trip. I managed the permits, the repairs, the supplies. I even fronted the annual maintenance fee, $1,500 this year alone. My family didn't lift a finger. They simply showed up. So when Jenna called a last-minute family Zoom in early September, I assumed it was to finalize this year's trip. I was already pulling up my spreadsheet, proud that I'd prepaid the cabin caretaker. But the moment I logged on, I knew something was off. The screen filled with too cheerful faces. Mom sipping wine, Dad chuckling at some inside joke, Ryan lounging like he didn't have a care in the world. And then there was Jenna practically glowing as she waved at someone off screen. That someone was Kyle, Jenna's new boyfriend. The man boy who made a living as a travel influencer, but mostly seemed to drift between couch surfing and Instagram stories about coffee beans. I'd met him once. He called my hiking boots cute vintage cosplay and asked if there was Uber in the forest. "Nathan," Jenna chirped, interrupting my opening sentence. "Guess what? Kyle is coming with us this year. He's so excited to connect with nature." That phrasing, "coming with us," made me pause. "Okay, cool," I said slowly, still trying to steer the call toward logistics. "So, about the trip dates," Ryan cut in. "Oh yeah, about that," he said, glancing sideways at Mom. "We kind of already left." Silence. "Left," I repeated. Mom cleared her throat, looking everywhere but the camera. "Sweetheart, it all came together really fast. Kyle had a gap in his schedule and it seemed easier this way. More spontaneous, less planning." That word planning hung there like an accusation. "I already paid the caretaker," I said flatly. "I blocked off the week at work. You take things so seriously, Nathan." Dad chuckled. "This was just a chance to let go. Relax." The betrayal didn't feel loud. It felt surgical. They'd gone to the cabin the one I paid for, organized, and kept up without even telling me. Worse, they brought Kyle. The guy who once asked me if hunting season meant there was a bar crawl in town. I didn't argue. I logged off, staring at the blank screen while a cold, clear realization took shape. They hadn't forgotten me, they'd excluded me. And they didn't even feel guilty. For the next few days, my texts to Ryan went unanswered. Jenna sent a breezy, "Hope you're well," with a selfie from the cabin deck. Mom posted pictures of Kyle chopping wood badly with hashtags like "Hermana Nature." That's when it clicked. I had always assumed they leaned on me out of need. But this wasn't need. This was entitlement, expectation. And the final insult, they used my money to fund their spontaneous getaway while treating me like the uptight killjoy they were relieved to leave behind. I poured myself a whiskey that night and opened my laptop not to plead, but to prepare. A spreadsheet glowed back at me, every payment, every utility bill, every auto transfer I'd quietly maintained for them. The total, almost $34,000 in 2 years. If they preferred Kyle's easygoing vibes to my intensity, they could have it. By dawn, I was ready to vanish, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. This was no longer about a trip to the cabin. This was about setting myself free. I didn't sleep that night. The glow of my laptop screen reflected in the whiskey glass as I scrolled through every auto payment, every quiet bailout I'd made for years. Each transaction was a symbol of the unspoken deal I'd had with my family. They could ignore me, belittle me, roll their eyes at my planning because they knew I'd still cover the bills. But what happens when you take the support for granted and then decide you don't even want the person behind it? By 3 a.m., I had a plan, a dangerous one, honestly. Cutting off people who rely on you isn't just a financial decision. It's emotional dynamite. I was about to light a match. The first thing I did was call my bank and kill the auto payments I'd set up for my parents' utilities. Gas, electric, water, all back in their names. Then I revoked the automatic tuition payments for Ryan's online creative entrepreneurship program, the one he never seemed to finish. And Jenna's car insurance gone. She could figure out how to keep her yoga instructor lifestyle intact on her own. The emergency credit card I'd given Dad for repairs was next. I froze it mid-billing cycle. No warning. Each click felt both terrifying and liberating, like I was cutting cords that had tethered me to a sinking ship. But it wasn't just about money. This was about symbols, about reclaiming that sacred Vermont cabin too. I remembered something my grandfather once said when we were sitting by the fireplace. This place isn't for people who just want a vacation. It's for people who respect what it takes to keep it alive. That line hit differently now. Before dawn, I called Uncle Caleb, the one family member who'd always respected me without pretense. They took Kyle up there, Caleb, without even telling me. On my deposit. A pause. They did what? Yeah, I said the words cold but calm. They're sitting in that cabin right now like it's theirs. Caleb let out a low whistle. You want me to come up there with you? No, I said quietly. I need to do this alone. That morning, I packed my old canvas duffel bag, filled the Subaru's tank, and began the 5-hour drive north. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn the kind of gold and crimson that always made me feel small and grounded at the same time. But today, I didn't feel connected to that beauty. I felt like an outsider driving toward a showdown I hadn't asked for, but couldn't avoid. As I drove, I thought about something else my grandfather used to say, a phrase I never understood until now. Respect isn't owed just because you share blood. Simple, but brutal. By the time I reached the gravel path that led to the cabin, I spotted the unmistakable signs that they were there. Ryan's dented Jeep parked sideways across the driveway like he couldn't even be bothered to park properly. Jenna's hatchback plastered with bumper stickers about mindfulness and adventure. And Kyle's car too, a leased SUV that still had the dealer plates on it. I parked quietly and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The sound of laughter carried from the porch. I could see them through the trees, Kyle holding a mug like he was king of the damn woods. Dad laughing at something Kyle said, Jenna sitting cross-legged on the steps as if this was all some Instagram shoot. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to take a slow breath. This was my family. These were the people who'd decided they didn't need me, that I was too intense, too careful, too predictable. And yet they were here using the cabin. I maintained the space. I protected the place that had always been about more than just rustic decor and crackling fires. I didn't barge in. I didn't yell. Instead, I unlocked the maintenance shed around back where the circuit breakers and water main valves were kept and methodically flipped everything off. Electricity gone. Water off. Then I walked quietly to the propane tank and shut that down too. Symbolic. Necessary. When the lights flickered out inside, I heard the confusion ripple immediately. The door swung open, and there was Kyle barefoot and wearing some ridiculous wool sweater. Dude, what the hell he called spotting me by the shed? I stayed calm. Power's off, I said simply. Did you turn it off? He asked, looking utterly baffled. Yes. Why would you do that? By now, the rest of them were crowding onto the porch, staring down at me like I was some lunatic. My father stepped forward. Nathan, what's going on? Why are you here? His voice had that tone disbelief followed by exasperation. Like I was the one ruining their plans. Like I was being difficult again. That's when it clicked for me, fully clicked, not just intellectually but in my gut. I was never going to be appreciated for keeping things afloat. Not once. They didn't respect me because they'd never had to confront what life looked like without me. I stood there a long moment, then looked Dad in the eye. I own 25% of this cabin, I said evenly. His face froze. What? Grandpa amended the deed before he died. Caleb and I each have a quarter stake. You don't get to use this place without me agreeing to it. You could feel the mood shift on that porch. Even Kyle finally stopped posturing. Jenna opened her mouth, but no words came out. Pack up, I said quietly. You're leaving today. And here's the kicker. They didn't even fight me. Not really. Maybe they knew they had no ground to stand on. Maybe they were just embarrassed. But one by one, they began packing. No shouting, no bargaining, just quiet shame. The last thing I did before I locked the cabin behind them was stand alone on the porch for a moment, staring out at the tree line where I used to sit as a kid with Grandpa, listening to him talk about respecting nature and yourself. I felt none of the triumph I thought I would feel. No satisfaction. Just clarity. I wasn't done yet. This was just the first step, and as I locked the door and turned back toward my car, I could feel a bigger storm brewing, a confrontation that would cut deeper than shutting off utilities or reclaiming a cabin. I was finally ready to stop being their silent safety net, and I had no intention of ever going back to how things were. The drive back from the cabin was different. I wasn't angry anymore, not the white-hot rage I felt when I first realized they'd excluded me. That had burned out somewhere between shutting off the water and locking the cabin door. What I felt now was cleaner, colder, and almost surgical resolve. For the first time in years, I was operating purely for myself, not to win their approval or keep peace. The entire drive back to Boston was quiet, except for the occasional hum of tires on wet asphalt. I didn't even bother to turn on the radio. My mind was busy drafting a list, not a spreadsheet this time, but something deeper, a mental inventory of every way they had depended on me, every subtle thread they had wrapped around my life under the label of family. Those threads had felt like duty. Now they felt like chains. When I finally got home, I made one last round of phone calls to cancel my parents' cell phone family plan, which I'd been paying for since 2015, to remove myself as guarantor on Ryan's lease, to formally close the joint account I'd set up with Jenna when she couldn't get her own credit card. Each action felt symbolic, like clearing a table after an indulgent but exhausting dinner party. No shouting, no explanations, just finality. Let them figure it out. Let them actually experience what self-reliance feels like, something I had been practicing silently for years while they coasted on my reliability. 2 days later, the texts began. First, Jenna, short and syrupy. Hey, so weird thing happened, my phone service got cut off. Do you know anything about that, Miss You? I didn't answer. Then Ryan. Dude, the rental office says my co-signer bailed. Are you messing with me? Still silence. And then Mom predictably ratcheted it up a notch. Nathan, your father and I are very worried. We can't reach Jenna or Ryan either. Did something happen? Please call us. This feels petty and beneath you. Beneath me. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. They didn't even realize they were proving my entire point. Their calm, orderly lives had always depended on me quietly taking care of things so they didn't have to. That evening, I sat in my dim apartment, a glass of bourbon in hand, and thought about that cabin again, not just the building itself, but what it symbolized. When I was a kid, that cabin had been my sanctuary, a place where I felt useful, respected, needed. Grandpa never mocked me for double-checking supplies or planning firewood. He'd called it being prepared. But somewhere along the way, my family took that trait and twisted it into a flaw. I could feel it now. They didn't want a son or a brother who planned, who paid, who protected. They wanted someone they could outsource their responsibility to. And the minute I asked for basic respect, they called me rigid, controlling, cold. But here's the truth that had crystallized since that long drive home. Control wasn't my problem. It was their crutch. And I was done being their crutch. 3 days later, Uncle Caleb called. Unlike the rest of them, he didn't beat around the bush. They're freaking out, he said flatly. Your mom called me twice today crying. Jenna says you cut her off. Ryan's blaming you for the lease thing. And your dad, well, he's trying to hold it together, but apparently they got a foreclosure notice on the house. I stayed silent for a beat, then asked, and you, what do you think, Caleb? He sighed. I think you finally did what you should have done a long time ago. But, he trailed off, they're asking for a family meeting. The phrase hit me like a slap. A family meeting. Like we were going to sit around the living room with coffee and hash this all out like adults. Like they hadn't replaced me with Kyle on a trip I paid for. Like this was just a misunderstanding and not a deliberate exclusion that exposed years of unspoken resentment. But there was one part of me, a small part, that wanted to see them squirm. That wanted them to sit in a circle and realize that I wasn't going to show up with a checkbook and fix everything anymore. That wanted to hear them say out loud what they really thought about me. So I said yes. Tell them I'll come, I told Caleb. But I'm not promising anything. I'm not coming to apologize or make this easy. I'm coming so they can look me in the eye and say what they should have said a long time ago. That Sunday, I pulled into my parents' driveway exactly at 6 p.m. I didn't bother to knock. I stood outside for a moment, taking in the sagging gutters, the peeling paint, the dead flowers in the front garden. The house itself had become a symbol of everything wrong with this family, a facade that used to seem solid but was now showing the cracks I'd been patching for years. Inside, they were all assembled in the living room, awkward and jumpy. Jenna perched on the arm of the sofa, arms crossed defensively. Ryan stared at his phone like he could somehow text his way out of this. Mom sat rigidly on the edge of her chair, her face drawn tight with worry. Dad, surprisingly quiet, stood by the fireplace where so many family photos used to hang, but now sat empty. No Kyle in sight, I noted. Probably bailed the second the utilities got cut. I didn't sit down. "So," I said, my voice quiet but sharp, "this is the part where you explain yourselves." The silence that followed was rich, uncomfortable, heavy. Finally, Mom spoke. "Nathan, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just needed a break from all the rules. You always have rules. Rules like paying bills on time, keeping a roof over your heads, making sure no one's car gets repossessed." I asked. "Yeah, those are tough rules." Dad cleared his throat. "Look, son, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. You've made your point, but it's time to get back to normal. Let's not let this ruin the family." And there it was, the phrase I'd been waiting for, get back to normal. But normal wasn't coming back. Because for the first time in my life, I was finally done patching their leaks, done carrying their weight. The silence that followed was different now. I could feel the power shift, quiet but absolute. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there looking around that room at people who had taken me for granted for far too long. And then I simply said, "You keep saying you want things to go back to normal, but this is normal now. You're going to have to learn how to live without me fixing everything." Their faces fell. It was the first time they truly understood I wasn't bluffing. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. I left the family meeting that night with my shoulders square and my mind clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking out weighed down by guilt or the exhausting responsibility of fixing what no one else wanted to address. They had shown me exactly who they were, people more comfortable mocking me behind my back than facing the truth when it was in front of them. And for once, I chose not to carry their discomfort for them. As I drove home, the phrase kept echoing in my head, "This is normal now." It was both a declaration and a warning, and I meant every word of it. But the real test wasn't going to be walking out of that room. It was going to be holding the line when their inevitable fallout hit. And it hit fast. The very next morning, Uncle Caleb called again, not to mediate, but to give me a heads up. "They're panicking," he said bluntly. "Your dad's been on the phone with the bank all morning. Jenna's car insurance lapsed officially as of today, and Ryan got notice that he's being evicted next month. Your mom's calling cousins asking for a short-term loan, but, well, let's just say your family reputation has caught up with her." That last part stung more than I expected. It shouldn't have surprised me. Mom had spent years spinning a picture-perfect narrative to outsiders while leaning on me to quietly hold everything together, but hearing that her calls for help were falling flat still felt like a small shock. I wasn't immune to the weight of that collapse. I just refused to let it drag me back in. That evening, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered, and of course it was Jenna. Her voice was light, almost playful, as if pretending nothing had happened would reset the whole dynamic. "Nate, listen." She began, slipping back into the casual nickname she hadn't used in years. "I was thinking, maybe I overreacted a little. Maybe we all did. Let's get coffee, just you and me. We can talk this out." I closed my eyes and took a breath before answering. "Jenna," I said evenly, "you're not calling because you miss me. You're calling because you need something." There was a pause on the line just long enough to confirm the truth she couldn't admit. "Well, it doesn't have to be like that. But it is," I said gently. "Look, I don't hate you. I don't hate any of you. I just finally understand that what we had wasn't family, it was dependency. I don't want to go back to that." Her response was a quiet fine followed by the click of disconnection. I stared at the phone for a long moment afterward, not sad exactly, but exhausted by the emotional labor it took to maintain relationships that were built entirely on what I could provide. That exhaustion gave way to something surprising: freedom. Real freedom, not the kind that comes from just saying no to a phone call or declining a family dinner, but the deeper, cleaner freedom of realizing that I was no longer a character in their story. I was writing my own now. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt routines around this new version of myself. Small things. At first, I replaced my aging couch, started working out more consistently, spent long weekends reading and hiking, not for anyone else, not because it was a checklist item, but because it gave me peace. I didn't talk about my family to coworkers or friends anymore. When they asked, I just said, "We're not close," and left it at that. No explanations, no defenses, just facts. The cabin stayed empty for that first winter, a conscious choice. I visited twice alone, once to install solar panels and upgrade the locks, a symbolic severance from the era when Dad treated it like an open house, and once just to sit on the porch with a coffee and watch the snow fall. Those quiet mornings felt more real than any holiday gathering we'd ever shared. The place felt different now, still mine, still sacred, but reclaimed in a new way. It wasn't a backdrop for obligation anymore. It was a symbol of boundary and peace. And then one afternoon in early spring, something unexpected happened. Uncle Caleb called, not to plead on anyone's behalf, but with an offer. "I've been thinking," he said, "maybe it's time I sold my quarter share of the cabin. You're the only one who really cares about the place now. I'm not as young as I used to be, and frankly, I'd like to see it cared for properly before I'm too old to come up there at all." His words hit me harder than I expected. Caleb was the only one who'd ever treated me like an equal in the family, the only one who never mocked my spreadsheets or quiet way of being. But his offer was fair, and I understood the subtext he was letting go too. After a moment's pause, I said, "Yeah, let's talk numbers." That night, I poured myself a bourbon, sat at my kitchen table, and started a new spreadsheet. This one wasn't for anyone else. No auto payments, no hidden gifts, no secret sacrifices. Just a simple, deliberate plan for purchasing Caleb's share of the cabin and turning the place into something new. Maybe a retreat, maybe a rental for hikers and writers, maybe just a quiet place where no one's voice but my own, and maybe a few birds and wind through the trees would fill the air. I didn't feel the need for revenge anymore. The silence I'd given them was punishment enough, and frankly, it wasn't even about punishment at this point. It was about choosing peace over chaos, reality over pretense, and as I reviewed the numbers, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe someday, years from now, I'd invite Ryan or Jenna, or even Mom and Dad up to the cabin, not out of obligation or guilt, but as equals, as people who'd finally learned to stand on their own. Maybe, or maybe not. I didn't need an answer right now. The next morning, I drove up to the cabin again, not to check on repairs or stock firewood or balance anyone else's needs, but just to be there. I sat on that old wooden bench my grandfather built, a place that once symbolized tradition and now represented something more radical, freedom with boundaries. As the sun set behind the trees, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. This was the new normal. And for the first time in my life, that felt exactly right.